Welcome to Pause for the Truth, where you can sit back, relax, and hear an honest dialogue about health, wealth, legal, and social issues. The hosts are Dr. Rogers Kane, family practice physician, and Jocelyn Turner, health education consultant, with co hosts from the Northeast Florida Medical Society and its foundation. Stay tuned for the truth about matters affecting you and your family. We're here to tell you what's really going on and why.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am not Dr. Rogers Kane nor Jocelyn Turner, so I must be the Northeast Florida Medical Society representative. I am Dr. Kim Barbell Johnson, no stranger to Pause for the Truth, but it's been a while since actually I've been back on the podcast. For those who may remember, I am a clinical researcher here at Mayo Clinic, Florida, and came many times in the past to talk all things COVID, and which was my sweet spot at the time. But tonight, I am not talking COVID, at least not in particular, and I'm here to share with you what I do in the clinical trial space with my team. Uh, at Mayo Clinic. So, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for continuing to support Pause for the Truth. Thank you very much for continuing to be an ally for those who are underrepresented in medicine, as this show has often been a show that has promoted opportunities and resources for members of our community who are otherwise disenfranchised. And I know that we do this all as a village. So thank you so much for what you've done in the past and for spending the next hour with us. So again, I am Kim Barbell Johnson, family medicine physician by training, and as always, I do nothing alone. And one of the joys that I have in coming to work every day is to work with some of the most collaborative and smart and invested humans that I could possibly work with in this city. And two of them, in fact, my favorite two of them, are actually here with me tonight because they know that I cannot do anything without them. So, without further ado, I'd like for my team members in what we call the Community Clinical Trial Administration team at the Mayo Comprehensive Cancer Center here in Florida. This is my team, and I'd like for them to introduce themselves first with Sandra.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandra Casanova, and I'm a clinical research coordinator at Mayo Clinic, specifically with the community based research unit. I have been in the role for over a year and 6 months now, and I
Who's
have
counting?
had I've had the joy to work with Dr. Kimball Barbell Johnson ever since November of last year, and I could not ask for a better PI. And
Mm.
that's why we're here today.
I owe you Christmas bonus. And, and Sunny.
Hi, I'm Sunny Confiato. I'm the operations manager that supports Dr. Barbell Johnson and community clinical trials here at Mayo. I've been at Mayo for a little over 20 years, but I spent the first part of my career in nursing and nursing leadership, and then moved into the research setting. And I work now with the cancer study conduct team here at the Florida campus.
Well, thank you very much. We'll be spending the next, hour or so with you talking a lot about what we do. And because we're all at Mayo Clinic, we are going to use Mayo Clinic as a platform to discuss clinical trials. Tonight's show is kind of different from some of the other shows that Doctors Kane and Ms. Turner have sponsored, in that we're going to just kind of dedicate an hour to talking about cancer, cancer clinical trials, and just to be advocates for clinical trial. It's not new to this topic. The show, we've talked about colon cancer research, breast cancer research. I've been guest on the show to talk about cancer and cancer things, cancer specific trials in this town before. But because it is October, where we know that we're going to see all sorts of bubblegum pink all over the community in celebration of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we thought it would be appropriate not only to talk about, cancer awareness in general, but to really talk about some of the things that we do specifically to advance the science in cancer. We're at a very wonderful place in science where we are making some significant advances in terms of screening tools, therapy, opportunities to treat and to help patients to survive cancer. But we still know that there are groups of people who are not benefiting at the same rate with those, even with those advancements. The reason behind that is multifaceted. It's due to lots of systemic racism, it's due to access issues, it's due to funding issues, insurance issues, awareness issues, education issues, you name it, it's probably contributing. But one of the significant parts of what we do to advance science for cancer and improve your ability to fight cancer is research. And this has been a kind of a taboo topic and a harder topic to discuss in our community. So we wanted to just be here to just kind of tell you literally what we do and tell you about some of the opportunities that we have. And some of the things that are actually happening in this town to advance the science of cancer, cancer trials. So again, I know that it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, but I wanted to give like a shout out because it's also Liver Cancer Awareness Month. In October, we have Metastatic Breast Awareness Day coming up, National Mammography Day coming up. So the Tatas are getting tons of attention. And we're just leaving September, which was Blood Cancer Awareness Month, Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, Gynecologic Cancer, Women Cancer Awareness Month, Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month, Prostate Cancer Awareness Month, Thyroid Cancer Awareness Month. And I wish that those were all the cancers that existed, but just in 2 months, this country has actually found dates and opportunities to really just help to raise the narrative and hype the educational level of cancers. And it's because we still have a lot of work to do. And I'm glad that we have an opportunity and a platform such as this to discuss cancer. It's not the most enjoyable topic to discuss, but I definitely think that it gives us an opportunity to really just help us to help ourselves. And so we thank you for being here for that. Now, we've talked on the show before about health disparities, and as you know, health disparities are it's something that we've lived with as Brown and Black people in this community, underrepresented people in this community. The good news is that as of 2022, the numbers of the incidence or the number of cancers within our population for a lot of cancers have been going down, but we still see a significant amount of cancers again in ethnic minorities. And even when we don't see the most cancers within a group of ethnic minorities, we see more deaths in groups of ethnic minorities who may have the same cancer. And so it's a challenge because while we are again doing all that we can to help to understand cancer and understand all these cellular changes in the body and to advance this body of work, people who look like me and Sandra and Sunny's relatives actually are not advancing and benefiting in the same way. So we really want to spend just some time talking through, that and talking through things that we are doing daily to really try to to address that. So I know you met them and they introduced themselves and told you what they do, but we're all members of Mayo Clinic's Comprehensive Cancer Center. And while we're talking about Mayo Clinic, this in no means is a promotion for Mayo Clinic. This is really using Mayo Clinic as a platform to discuss what we do because it's what we know best. But we could be talking about, any academic center anywhere around the world that's committed to advancing health equity and health disparity. And if that, system was Magenta Clinic or any other clinic, that's what we could call this. We just happen to be employed at Mayo Clinic, but the messages are still the same. And so I just want us to make sure that we are, we disclose where we are, but also speak from our hearts because this is more about the population that we're trying to help, and the work that we're trying to do to advance health equity and decrease the disparities that exist in health. So I get to host for a little while, which is kind of unusual because I'm usually on the other side answering questions. So I'm kind of loving this. And I really think it's important for you to know not only what doctors do. You guys have heard from people like me forever. Dr. Kane is like my mentor. He trained me, and there are lots of brown and black doctors in this town who have come on the show. But I don't think we've actually had a coordinator who has been featured on Pause for the Truth. So um, it's important to kind of understand all the people that you possibly could interact with and interface with in the clinical trial space, so it's not as foreign. So I'm going to ask Sandra first to kind of give us a little bit more background about not only what she does, and I do want to know what you do, Sandra, but to really kind of tell us how you got into the space. You know, there's a saying that says people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So, you know, I know that you care, and I just kind of like for you to share your very unique background with our listening audience.
Sure thing. So I am first of all, and very proudly Cuban American. I was born in Cuba, lived there for 19 years, and then moved to the States. Over there, I went to medical school, only completed the first year of it, and during that
I didn't know
time,
that.
there was yes, and during that time there was a lot of research and books that I needed to read and things like that. And one saying that we have back home, it's always that a doctor never stops studying. You always have new things that come up, and it always was so fascinating to me that what happens, like how do we get this information, how do we know this information is actually accurate, how do we change these things. But it's important to note that for example, in my country we don't have a big platform for research. We
Mhm.
get the research, or we get the information that we feed our doctors, that we feed our physicians from trials that go on here in the States or in major
Mhm.
countries, right, first world countries. And ever since I came to the States, I was a little bit of in a pickle because I didn't want to go to school for 8 years to become a physician. Um, definitely
Smart.
not after they told me that none of my credits from Cuba would transfer over
Mhm.
here. So it's like if I have to start from zero, I still want to be in healthcare, and I ended up going for a bachelor's in health sciences. And during that time, at UNF, I had the pleasure of having professors like Dr. Barr, who is a researcher, community researcher as well, that introduced me a little bit of like what research is, how broad it actually can be, that it's not only clinical trials, which is actually what we work in now, but
Mhm.
there's also research that goes on for behavioral sciences, stats, disparities,
Mhm.
anything under the sun basically
Mhm.
can be
Mhm.
researched, right? And my first research project with her was an educational study that they were doing in Tampa, in the Tampa area, for pregnancy prevention in teens. And I kind of like helped her a little bit and got to
Mhm.
know how data was collected, and how data was analyzed, and what results you could get out of there, and publications and things
Mhm.
like that. And ever since then, I just liked it so
You were
much
hooked.
that I exactly.
Mhm.
And then I heard about the Mayo Clinic. I had always read papers about Mayo Clinic.
Mhm.
I had always known Mayo Clinic was a huge place
Mhm.
for research, right?
Mhm.
As it is one of our shields. And I knew they were here in Jacksonville since I
Mhm.
got placed here in Jacksonville when I came
Mhm.
to the States. I was like,
It was
why
like
not try?
marriage in heaven.
Why not
Mhm.
try Mayo
Mhm.
Clinic? So one of the parts of my cohorts at school was you had to complete an internship to be able to graduate. And my internship, I told my professor from the beginning, I want to intern at Mayo Clinic. I want to know what they
Mhm.
actually have going on there, because I have always heard about them. And based on my experience with Dr. Barr, I just wanted to learn more about research. And I got placed in the Center for Health Equity and Community Engagement Research. At the time, helped a little bit with many different initiatives, like any intern does, uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
where you help everywhere you can so you can get more experience. And then from there, I transitioned into this role of what
Mhm.
I do now, which is I basically help the patient learn about the studies that we have going on in the clinic, and help physicians with the regulatory part of a research or a clinical trial.
You
Clinical
are
trials.
you are the smarty pants that you are, of course, and you're like throwing a whole bunch of information out there at us, and which is unfortunate that you decided you didn't want to spend 8 years so that you could kind of like take over my practice at the end of my career, because you're definitely smart and beautiful in that space. But let's just slow down just a little bit to kind of talk through what how you got here. I really think that one of the things, I was at a meeting this weekend with cancer researchers, the American Association for Clinical Research for Cancer Research. And as we were talking, whether it was physicians or clinicians, whatever, we really came to the reality and had to admit that if we're going to continue to do this work, we can't do it alone. Like, we can't just be scientists alone, because it takes so many people to support this work that we do in clinical trials. And so it's important that we have you, Sandra. It's important that we have clinical coordinators, and that's a role. And I love that you talked about, how you kind of stumbled across it and kind of fell in love with it, because I think that's how I ended up in this space as well. But as a clinical coordinator, I think that there are probably people who are probably just hearing about that for the first time, who want to tell their children or grandchildren about this opportunity that you can be in medicine and love medicine, and not necessarily, be a physician or a physician assistant or an allied health in the allied health space in the more traditionally known spaces. So thank you for sharing that. And then what you do every day, in terms of connecting to the patient. How does that work? Do patients come to you, and do you get phone calls that says, "I heard about this clinical trial and I want to know more about it," or how do you engage with the patients who are interested in clinical research?
Sure. So my work is a little bit unique in the fact that, because I work in the community-based research unit, I have a combination of how do I get patients to sign up for a trial, or
Mhm.
how do I share information with patients.
Mhm.
Portion of that is me going out in the community at events, in
Mhm.
which the population that we are trying to bring into the research
Mhm.
study is present. And at that point, then I kind of have to do a little bit of like public speaking, uh,
Mhm.
to share what the
Mhm.
study is about,
Mhm.
what are we offering, why is it important that
Mhm.
they may be part of it. But at the end of the day, it is always the participants' decision, right? So that is one method of recruiting, what we call recruiting patients
Mhm.
or participants into a study. Another one is going through records that we have in the clinic, to reach out to patients and make them aware that the opportunity exists,
Mhm.
so that they can make a decision on whether or not they want to participate in
Mhm.
the study during their time in clinic, or if they just want to make an appointment to be part of the study, right? Another way in which we can reach out to patients or get patients aware of clinical trials that are going on within our space is physicians referrals.
Mhm.
So we try to make aware as many physicians as we can within
Mhm.
the organization and within the groups
Mhm.
that we're targeting, maybe disease groups
Mhm.
or treatment groups.
Mhm.
Basically just letting them know the study is available, that the patients that they see may be eligible
Mhm.
for the study, and share with them a little bit of what are we looking for, so that they can make
Mhm.
the decision on whether or
If
not
the
they think their
patient's
patient
eligible. Mhm.
qualifies,
Mhm.
right? And
Does
then
that
from
seem
there,
to help? Like, when the physicians are aware, does that seem to be helpful for recruiting?
100%. I think that
Mhm.
more and more patients, especially in the minority group that I work in,
Mhm.
um, they rely a lot on their physician and what their physician thinks, right? So
Okay.
having the physicians as an ally to the research study is always helpful in getting the patient to listen to what you
Mhm.
have to share, and to actually enroll.
That's fascinating, and thank you for sharing. I have a couple follow-up questions that I need to ask you probably about some of the things that you said. But Sunny, I'm sure that you have entered into this space with as much passion and enthusiasm as Sandra Casanova, but you said that you spent your career in nursing. So tell us how you got from, the bedside to the bench in research.
Okay. I've been at Mayo Clinic for most of my adult life. I started here with a high school diploma scanning medical records,
Wow.
and I worked full time to be able to go through nursing school. I participated in a lot of different nursing here and different units, trying to learn and find my niche. And I finally fell in love with genetics. So I worked in the
Mm,
clinical genetics department with our geneticists and genetic counselors. Um, and I did that for almost a decade. And in that space, I learned about cancer genetics and helping patients understand their genetic risks, and that really became my passion. And from there, I wanted to learn, how could we get patients on research protocols? How could I help write protocols that would translate into the clinic, that we could get more patients the genetic testing that they needed for their medical management?
mhm. Why
Um,
why did why genetics though? Like how did why was genetics important? I mean, you're a nurse, you're seeing people nauseated and vomiting and sick. Like how did you like say genetics
so
is important?
Well, I landed in the genetics area because I worked next to our breast center, and
Mhm,
I worked next to the genetic counselor,
mhm,
Megan Roberts at the time, and Dr. Riegert Johnson here was our only genetics team at the time,
mhm,
and I could hear them communicating with their patients, educating their patients, screening families, being proactive to prevent cancers.
mhm,
Um, Providing education on what it means to have a genetic variant, and kind of, it was very empowering. It wasn't scary the way they presented having a genetic variant, and it was empowering to the patients to take some action, to do some
mhm,
screening to help prevent maybe a family member from having cancer. And I just really learned from them, and I love that. And so I started then in cancer genetics, um, and then went on to learn other genetics. But
mhm,
that's how it started.
mhm.
And now that I've landed in the cancer center as the operations manager, um, I
And what is
brought that with
what is
me.
that? What does
Yeah.
that entail?
So I'm the operations manager for the study conduct team, the cancer center here in Florida, and we take and create, my main role is to create processes and pathways and operationalize things to get our
Mhm,
research clinical trials to as many patients
mhm,
as we can. That's my
mhm,
end goal, and build
mhm,
a team and work with my team and support our physicians to be able to do that.
mhm,
And it's kind of the same passion for me, is
mhm,
when our patients have tried standard of care options
mhm,
and they've
mhm,
progressed, or they're out of treatment options.
mhm,
My passion is to provide as many patients with
mhm,
all extra options, research
mhm,
options,
mhm,
um, any other effort we can to help
mhm,
our patients that have progressed on standard of care on
mhm.
the drugs that we know.
And
So yeah,
that's a hard work. I mean, it's probably emotionally fatiguing as well, isn't it?
it's amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Uh,
we have a great, team, and we function within the clinic, but my work with you, which I know you 2 know this, but we can
mhm,
share it here,
mhm,
is trying to get that option available for
mhm,
patients, outside
mhm,
of the walls of Mayo Clinic. That's the goal,
mhm,
is to reach as many patients that we can,
mhm.
by supporting this.
And I say this with love, but how does a non underrepresented minority get so passionate and sensitive to the issues about
Mhm.
these disenfranchised groups of people. How did you find the need to really support this as an ally or as a participant in this medical space?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of variables that have really influenced me. One is being uninsured does not mean you're a minority, and being a
Mhm,
minority
mhm,
does not mean
mhm,
you're uninsured. And so
mhm,
that's
mhm.
part of it. I grew up,
Okay, wait. Can you say that
yeah.
again?
Being uninsured
Mhm,
does not
mhm,
mean you're a
mhm,
minority, and being a
mhm,
minority does not mean you're uninsured. And
mhm,
sometimes people make this assumption that that's the same thing we're talking about. And
mhm,
I grew up, my dad is a contractor and
mhm,
owns his own business, and he's an incredible work ethics, worked hard his whole
mhm,
life,
mhm,
but insurance was not something that we
mhm,
had.
mhm,
We didn't have commercial insurance when I grew up, um, and I wanted that for my children, and that's
mhm,
part of why I came to work at
mhm,
Mayo,
mhm,
and I've provided that for my family. But I had an accident when I was in the 5th grade,
mhm,
and we didn't have insurance, and I watched
mhm,
my dad try to help get me
mhm,
health care,
mhm,
without insurance in the 5th grade, and so that stuck with me.
mhm,
So that's from my childhood, and my family's a very diverse family,
mhm,
and we have experienced other, um, experiences just through that,
mhm,
and so I it's very close to my heart,
mhm,
and for me, it's um getting the opportunity for every patient that needs the research
mhm,
protocol,
mhm.
um, and so that's why I'm here.
Well, it reads, as my son
Mhm.
would say, as an actor, and I know that your heart, as I work with you daily, is in this space. But I really want to echo what you said, because sometimes when we start talking about underrepresented minorities or immigrants, we think that somehow that equates to lack of something, and sometimes it's just literally lack of an opportunity, or maybe not having the knowledge to do certain things. So we're going to hold that thought just for a second, because I want to come back to both of you and talk a little bit more about what you do, and then what's happening here in your workspaces that may be of interest to the community. But for now, I'd like for us to go to our History Makers Minute. Tyrone, take it away.
Hello and welcome to Pause for the Truth's History Makers Minute, October 3rd, 2023. As we reflect on the past and present, it is important to recognize the people who have made significant contributions to America and the rest of the world. Today we present Dr. Alexa Canady. Born November 7, 1950. Dr. Alexa Irene Canady Davis was the first African-American woman in the United States to become a neurosurgeon. Canady Davis was born to Elizabeth Hortense Golden Canady and Dr. Clinton Canady, Jr., a dentist, on November 7, 1950, in Lansing, Michigan. After graduating from Lansing High School in 1967, Canady Davis received her B.S. degree from the University of Michigan in 1971 and her M.D. degree, cum laude, from the College of Medicine at the University of Michigan in 1975. Between 1975 and 1976, Canady Davis completed an internship at Yale New Haven Hospital. She next trained as a resident in neurosurgery at the University of Minnesota between 1976 and 1981. After a fellowship in pediatric surgery at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia between 1981 and 1982, Canady Davis returned home to Michigan and joined the neurosurgery department at Detroit's Henry Ford Hospital. In 1983, she was hired at Children's Hospital of Michigan, where she later became chief of neurosurgery in 1987. Before that, Canady Davis was certified by the American Board of Neurological Surgery in 1984. In 1985, she began teaching at Wayne State University School of Medicine as a clinical instructor of neurosurgery. In 1997, she was elevated to professor of neurosurgery at Wayne School of Medicine. In 1988, she married George Davis, A.U.S. Navy recruiter. From 1987 to 2001, Kennedy Davis was chief of neurosurgery at Children's Hospital of Michigan. Her areas of expertise are craniofacial abnormalities, hydrocephalus, tumors of the brain, and congenital spine abnormalities. Upon retirement from the position of chief of neurosurgery in 2001, Kennedy Davis moved to Pensacola, Florida with her husband, also retired, a city that he had lived in during part of his career in the Navy. But, after several years of retirement, Kennedy Davis was lured back to surgery as a consultant and to a part-time surgical practice at the Sacred Heart Medical Group Hospital. Kennedy Davis has received numerous professional recognitions, including being named Woman of the Year by the American Women's Medical Association in 1993, as well as being inducted into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame. She mentors young people by speaking at high schools in the Pensacola area, hoping that her accomplishments are helping to inspire the dreams of younger generations. Hello and welcome.
Well, that was informative. It actually is interesting to kind of look at history, and you hear dates like 1970, whatever, and it seems like it's forever long ago. It really wasn't that long ago. But yet, I don't know if you both know this, but Mayo Clinic has the only Black oncologic neurosurgeon in the country. So it's amazing that we still have these gaps in diversity in these spaces. And while she was a neurosurgeon and we have more Black neurosurgeons, overall, they're less than 5% of the practicing physicians are Black in this country. And then we're still at places where there's only one of something in 2023 just absolutely blows my mind still. So I appreciate us just kind of having a moment to kind of reflect on our history. But we are here, while our history is important. I say every day that we are here trying to plan and cure the problems of the future, right? We're trying to make the generations who will follow us and those who will live the tomorrows, their lives better. And like I said earlier, that one of the ways that we do that is by increasing representation in clinical trials. So I wanted to just come back to a couple things, actually. Sandra, we were talking about how you reach patients, and I don't know if this is a circulated fact, even among our team, but there's data that shows that if you ask a group of physicians if they discuss clinical trials with their patients as they see their patients, about 30% of physicians actually do, right? Which is a very small number. That's less than one in three patients that is going to have any information about clinical trials. And yet we're talking about the need to advance medicine. So that is one barrier, talking to people like me, clinicians like me, to get us to actually have the conversation. That's busy. We have lots of excuse, but there are teams. There are ways. Then you can maybe share with us kind of ways that we can work with teams, because if you ask patients, we often say, oh, patients are, they don't trust and they're scared of clinical trials. Well, if you ask patients, like we've done in studies, about 70% of them said, if discussed with their clinical team and their medical providers, that they would be interested in at least considering or enrolling in clinical trials. So that's a big, dichotomy there for me. So I think, what you do, Sandra, it's for me is very interesting in that how do you, what do you see in that space? Do you find that you have to work extra hard to I know Mayo is kind of different, but you've been around the block a little bit in this space to get clinicians to actually consider the clinical trials, that not only to get representation within the clinical trials, but just to consider the clinical trial at all.
Right. And I think that part of why those numbers are so small now, it has a little bit to do with what Sunny was mentioning when she was sharing about her role. Most of us, and I'm talking about minorities, healthcare workers, and such. When we think about clinical trials, most of the time we refer back to those phase 1, phase 2 trials. So those trials that are available when the patient has exhausted all of their treatment options and now are able to receive an experimental treatment that may be able to help. But I think it is important. When I started here at Mayo Clinic, all of my trials were minimal risk. And
Mhm.
we go through an extensive
What does that
um,
mean? What does that mean, minimal risk?
minimal risk means that a trial will not represent any risk greater to the patient than the one that they would have if they go to their doctor for a regular
Okay.
checkup,
Mhm.
right? So
The
there's
the
no.
safer of trials. Yeah.
Correct, the safest
Mhm.
that they have for the patient. And so it was very interesting because I went through a very extensive training that had a lot of information about those phase 1, phase 2 trials, which are the trials that are available
Mhm.
for patients that are still experimental.
Mhm.
So we're still finding out what the
Mhm.
treatment option, the device, or the
Mhm.
pharmaceutical does
Mhm. Mhm.
for the patient, right? And I thought it was so powerful. Instead of looking at it like, oh, I got stuck with the easy trials, right?
Mhm.
I thought about it, how awesome it is that I get to work with underrepresented minorities in clinical trials with the easiest trials they can go through
Mhm.
to introduce research to them.
Mhm.
Me, it was very important to make sure that the patients had the best of the experiences,
Mhm.
because if they do at this point where the risk is so
Mhm.
minimal, where they wouldn't
Right.
go through
Mhm.
anything experimental, it's
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
safe. It's something that they would do
Mhm.
to learn something or maybe
Mhm.
to help the
Mhm.
community of researchers. I would think they're more likely to be open to those
Mhm.
phase 1, phase 2 trials if they ever need to go through them, right? So let's say
Mhm.
that a person like my family, I think about my family all the time because
Mhm.
we are all immigrants. We
Mhm.
don't know the system very well,
Mhm.
or we have to navigate extra things within the
Mhm.
system. And I think about my mom, and my mom was one of the first people that I thought of when I was explaining my job, to
Mhm.
make sure that she would understand. So,
Yeah.
what is a clinical trial, right? Like, it's not only those very hardcore
Mhm.
studies that we have, but also those observational studies
Mhm.
or those
Mhm.
cross-sectional
Mhm.
studies that allow us to
Mhm.
learn more about the community that we're studying. And so I think it that's how I took the role, and I think that that also has to do with the fact that um, that is the perception that we have when we think about clinical trials, but they are so much more than only those experimental ones that we think about when research comes to the conversation.
Those are great points. I've done clinical trials since about 2009, even as a family physician. And it's funny because you use the word experimental. And as a clinician, investigator, I say investigational product because it somehow I feel that that's more tolerable. Because when we think of experimental, we think like we're a guinea pig, and it's the same thing. But even the language of clinical trials somehow makes it seem a little bit unnerving. And you're absolutely right that we don't normally think about those things that aren't the last resort treatment. And I love the fact that Sunny has had a career in genetics, because when we look at where we are in terms of one of our greatest abilities right now is the ability to prevent the burden of disease. So we may not be able to prevent right now, you getting something, but being able to identify something early, to diagnose something early, control any risk that you may have so that you could potentially delay or prevent it from happening, and then to give you the right education so you can anticipate that. We know those are the kinds of things that increases your ability to survive a disease. And a lot of that is actually because of what we've done in the genetic space, right, Sunny? Is that correct? And so even having the opportunity to have these conversations with patients and community members about genetics, it does sound scary. I think it's still when I think of my mother, you start talking about DNA, whether it's COVID or something else, it's like, okay, that's enough. I but Sunny, when how what's the best way to actually for us to actually think about genetics in clinical trials, and how, as a genetic counselor, did you find it did you find that you were most successful in helping people to just come to terms with it being okay to be in a genetic test or genetic trial, whether it's in the practice space or the clinical trial space?
Yeah, I think I worked with the genetic counselors and the geneticist here. But I think for me in the cancer space, it's so critical because the genetic variants, if we can identify a genetic variant for a patient, it really influences the medical management, the treatment options, the screening options, for the patient, for the affected patient, but also if we could take that information and use it, like I said earlier, I loved when genetic information is presented as empowering the patient to take
Mhm.
action on what they've identified, because I think in that setting, it really gives the patient something they can do for themselves, for their family, for their children, and for their siblings and their parents. Because normally, most of the cancer genetic panels test autosomal dominant. So
Oh,
50%. Yeah, 50% autosomal dominant is a 50% chance of inheriting the mutation. And and so if you can find a variant in an affected cancer patient and we identify a pathogenic variant, we can use that variant, that specific misspelling, to check family members if they also have the variant. And then that allows them to get extra screening and proactive measures to screen at earlier ages, to do more thorough screening. So maybe instead of just a mammogram, they also get an MRI covered by their testing. They add extra GYN screenings. We add extra lab works. And then that way, we may find um, it's not going to prevent the person from getting cancer, but we will find it at the very beginning and we'll be able to have a much better outcome than maybe someone who we get diagnosed at a later stage for a very aggressive cancer. And this is particularly important. I found this a lot in our breast cancer patients. African American women and triple negative breast cancer. There's a ton of literature. You can do a whole segment on just that. But to use that information and empower the patient to take action is really my favorite part of the entire approach. And also it allows the physician to use that information for their medical management and treatment options. So
absolutely. And that's a big thing because as you mentioned, we have so many examples where we have a late presentation of cancers and late disease presentation. So that limits our options, right, for treatment or for a cure. So anything to get at something early is definitely going to be an advantage. It is important there that I mention that, particularly because we are talking about breast cancer, that just about 10% of the cancers that we diagnose actually has a genetic connection. So while it is important that we can, if we are able to at least identify those who are at risk, those who have family history that were at risk, we definitely want to do that. But it's also important to actually make sure that we sound the alarm that primary prevention is still important. Self breast exams during this month, the buddy check system to where you remind your sisters to do their breast checks for mammograms. As you know, we've had new recommendations where the age for initial screening has been lowered by 5 years, so that we are recommending that mammograms are done at 45 versus 50, and you're discussing those things with your physician or your clinician, because we want to actually get to the cancer signal early. And I think what how this is connected to clinical trial is we've known this. We've seen younger Black women dying of breast cancer. We've seen younger people dying of colon cancer, et cetera. But it's the data that actually drove the recommendation for the change in screening. So when you look at the new recommendations for breast cancer, screening through mammography, you see that the explanation of why the age was lowered was because there was finally enough data in the clinical trial space to support that recommendation as a primary screen. So I think that they are hand in hand. What we do in clinical trial impacts what we do in the practice space, and it's important that we're all represented in both spaces, for us to benefit from that. Thank you for that, Sunny. I know that there are specific trials that you have done um, that probably have more relevance to our community, and maybe some trials that you're currently doing or activities that you're currently participating in this month or any other month that is important for us to at least hear more about things like cancer screening, clinical trial involvement, hear more about what we can do to be proactive and empowered in the clinical trial space. And, Sunny or Sandra, would you just kind of walk us through one or two of those kinds of things that our listening audience might benefit from knowing?
Sure thing. So I can share a little bit of some of the trials that are going on now that I'm working on that and that are relevant to the topics that we discussed. Some of them are, for example, we talked about breast cancer and why is it important to know your risk factors for breast cancer. And one of the studies that we have right now is the CARE study that is calling for participants that are African American, Black Hispanic, and white Hispanic participants to understand what exactly is their perception of risk factor and what would determine or what would prompt them to seek those screening methods early on. So we're looking for younger women 18 to 55 to know exactly what would prompt them to think about those risk factors. I was actually reading something the other day, and it is interesting to know that there was a study done in which women with breast cancer recall, and we were talking about biases, but basically those perceptions that we have in our mind, and women that were diagnosed with breast cancer, after diagnosis they thought that their diet was high in fat versus
Mm-hmm.
women that were not diagnosed. They
Mm-hmm.
thought that their diet was not as high in fat. And it goes to think about what is our perception of risk factors ahead of
Mm-hmm.
time. So we
Mm-hmm.
don't think about those risk factors
Mm-hmm.
until we are given
In a
those
harm's
news,
way, right?
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was very interesting, and that's one of the studies that we have going on, which is the CARE study. We also have for
I don't
Black.
want to interrupt you, but I think that we have actually a poster about the CARE study. Is that right? Did you send that over to Tyrone, or is that one of the
We
ones?
did,
Okay.
correct, and
Yeah.
it has a QR code in which you can give your
Okay.
information if you would be
Okay.
interested in
Yeah.
participating in the
So,
study. We have the English and the Spanish one for Spanish speakers, but
Percepción de lo that. Yes. Okay. And did you send the English one as well? But
yes.
okay, perfect. And then what I think Doctors Kane, Tyrone, and Jocelyn do is they provide the links to these resources after the show. So if you're interested in some of the trials that we're possibly talking about, and thank you, Tyrone, for showing them. There will be links to these QR codes after the show on all the platforms for Pause for the Truth. So I interrupted you. I apologize. Sandra, go ahead, because it looks like there are a couple more things that we can take advantage of in this community.
For sure. Another trial that is also just observational is the HPV study, which is just basically trying to understand what is the knowledge of the community of HPV and HPV vaccination, and how preventive getting the vaccine is for certain type of cancer development. We also have
Hey,
or
don't go too
prostate.
far on. I know that we're going to be out of time soon, but HPV is probably one of those studies that I have to spend a second just kind of talking about, because here's an opportunity that we have a vaccine to eradicate cancer. I mean, I don't know if we could get any more excited about something like that. But this, when we are, if you saw that the Nobel Prize was actually awarded to the people who developed the COVID mRNA platform just yesterday or the day before yesterday, and they were talking about working on this 10 years ago. Like we were thinking, all of this DNA stuff was yesterday when COVID was part of our conversation, but a decade before, we were actually realizing what we can do in the vaccine space to work on things like this for eradication of cancers. And we use that same platform to develop vaccines for COVID. And while that might be controversial for whatever it is, it's still the science that has been evolving. HPV has been one of those very exciting places because it has finally given us an opportunity to vaccinate children as young as 9 and adults up to their 40s to decrease their chances of developing not only cervical cancers, but certain head and neck cancers, certain anal and oral cancers that are consistent with the high risk strains of the human papillomavirus. So I think that while there are many recommendations and lots of Gardasil commercials, et cetera, that we see, I don't think it really registers that what we're really doing is vaccinating a population to decrease getting cancer. And I think that's important because we're going to see that platform a lot, I think, as we look at what's happening in the the immunity space for treatment, immune technology for treatment. So thank you for continuing to push the envelope for HPV education, Sandra, with those trials in this community. And I hope that our listening audience will take advantage of getting some information, at least helping us to understand how to better um, produce
Approach
the
that.
education that we need, yes, to give you the answers that can help you to make the decisions for informed health care, your own personal informed health care. Okay, I'm going to be quiet now so that you can talk about your last.
So the last one
Mhm,
that I wanted to talk about is our vitamin D study, which is
mhm,
a study that we are doing for Black and African American males with a personal history of prostate cancer to try to understand, number one, how common vitamin D deficiency and insufficiency is in this population, and also what the role of vitamin D replacement is on the immune response. So basically, why vitamin D helps your immune response
yeah,
as a whole.
this is a hot topic in a lot of things. We're hearing about vitamin D. We're hearing about Black people and vitamin D, and whether or not Blacks can get vitamin D from the sun, or do you need to, there's a lot of controversy, but this is an emerging topic for survivorship and return of cancers too in the clinical space. So this study that you mentioned is for African American or Black men with a history of prostate cancer. So your prostate cancer could have been yesterday or last year or 10 years ago, as long as your vitamin D levels and the other criteria for the study are met, then you can participate in this trial.
That is correct. Yes.
And do you have to be a patient here at Mayo Clinic to participate?
You don't. And all of the
Okay.
study procedures are covered by the study. So we're actually reaching out to our community to make
Good.
sure that we have a representative sample of the
Okay.
community here in Jacksonville and the Mayo Clinic patients that we have. So it's a combination.
What about if they can't get to Mayo? Do you have ways to accommodate those kinds of things with this trial?
We actually do. So we actually
Hmm.
do have a remote phlebotomy capability. So we're able to meet the
Remote
patient where they
phlebotomy
are.
capability. You say that so beautifully. You mean you can actually get the labs without coming on campus?
Exactly. You can actually
Yeah.
get the lab done at your
Yeah.
home,
Okay.
and get collected and participate in the study without leaving your home or your responsibilities that you have outside of your work or things like that. So we're
Okay.
able to meet the patient where they
Good.
are
I love that.
if they're willing to participate in the study.
Talk about, low or minimal risk to be able to participate in a study that can not only help you, but help us to get information and you help clients as well. Tyrone, I think, did we actually see that poster, the prostate cancer trial, if you wanted to put that up? So there's the HPV one and the other, that one. I think if you are listening, you have an uncle, a brother, someone who has had a history of prostate cancer, whether or not you know anything about the vitamin D level, or you want to share this with your faith-based community or your educational community or family members, I would just encourage you to scan that QR code and get some additional information. I think it's probably going to land at your desk if they should contact anyone about this trial, right, Sandra? And then you can get some more information. I love these opportunities that are low risk that really allow us to just get more comfortable with cancer. And I love the fact that Mayo Clinic has actually created a study that allows us to get not for patients not to have to come to our brick and mortar campus, allow decentralization or of these processes, which is where a lot of trials are going. Sunny, I did not forget you, and I know we just have about 5 minutes left of the show, but you are in charge of every single clinical trial that we do on the Florida campus in some way, fashion, or form. So I'm not going to make you recite line and verse all the trials that are happening, but I know that as an operation manager, you're also very tuned in to a lot of these community type things. Any information that you want to share with us?
I'm not sure if you want. I can share the information for the Sisters Network event that we're gonna have on November 4th. I can give the information. I didn't turn it in ahead of time, but we can give the information. The
Yeah, we
topic
do.
is, yeah, the topic's going to be cancer, conquering the fear of a breast cancer diagnosis. And it's a free in-person event here in town on November 4th in the morning. And and we can send more information. Oh, look, brilliant.
He's
Um,
so brilliant.
this will also be attached, but we're going to have a physician and a genetic counselor speak at this event. And it will share kind of some of the risk factors that we talked about earlier, the patterns that we looked for. So if you have family history of breast cancer or breast cancer, um, kind of the things we look for: multiple people in the family, multiple generations in the family, bilateral disease, young diagnoses, so early um, diagnosis under the age of 40. Any of those kind of things that we'll talk about and provide some speaker sessions on and be available to help answer any questions at that event.
And this is not a Mayo Clinic event. It's
It's not.
it's it's a Sisters Network, which,
It's a
if I
Sisters
remember,
Network, Northeast Florida.
yeah. So one of my favorite groups, as a matter of fact, and actually one of our emeritus members of the Northeast Florida Medical Society, Dr. Ken Jones, has been a major educator and supporter of that group. As you know, he's an iconic surgeon in our community and has done so much in the space of breast cancer care and studies. And I believe he will be there. I know he's been there in the past and has been well received. So I'm really proud of Mayo Clinic for partnering for this event and actually to bring the updates in genetics and cancer screening to that space. So kudos to Mayo, and thank you, Sunny, for sharing that information. Thank you, Tyrone, for sharing the site. And again, I know that will continue to live as a link from the show for anyone who's interested, but it is on November 4th. Is that correct? November 4th at 8:15 a.m. early on a Saturday morning,
Hyatt
8:15 to
Regency.
1 at the Hyatt Regency. So thank you for that. Um, as I look at the screen, I feel like I'm being like robotic, and I need to do the Michael Jackson dance or something. But I apologize if my Wi-Fi is kind of weird. Been sitting here in the office since 8 o'clock this morning, and I have been looking forward to spending this hour with our listening audience and with both of you. It's funny how quickly time goes by. We're already at the end of the hour. It's 7:28, and there's been a lot of information I think that we've shared. And I just wanted to remind the Pause for the Truth audience that we have talked in the past. If you're interested in more information about just what are clinical trials, what are the phases of clinical trials, there's on our website the show that Dr. Falaki Odetna and myself did about clinical trials, clinical trial research that you can go to. Similarly, like I said, Dr. Jones had a session on breast cancer. I think Dr. Rawls or others have done GI cancers. So I would just encourage you, as we actually have these opportunities by named days and months to really get more educated, to go back and look at those recordings for additional information on this topic. We heard the word, I never used it before COVID, trusted resources, trusted sources. For people who are concerned about where you get your information, A Pause for the Truth is definitely one of the trusted sources. I know Dr. Kane and Jocelyn Turner takes great pain in making sure that they bring guests and resources that can help you to elevate your own personal level of knowledge and put in proximity the resources that may be of benefit to their guests. So, we appreciate the opportunity to be among those trusted sources for clinical trials, clinical trial information for cancer awareness, clinical trial advocacy, and we'll continue to be here even after the show. I don't think I'm going to be able to sit as Jocelyn Turner or Rogers Kane every week, but it definitely was fun to be here today and to be able to share a little bit of what we do with the Pause for the Truth audience. Again, I'm just so grateful that we've had this hour together. Before we go, and then we'll close it out, I'd just like to give first of all, my sincerest thank you on behalf of Drs. Kane, Tyrone, and Jocelyn Turner to you, because I know you are way after hours and probably over hours when you look at the month that we've had in the past. So thank you very much, Sunny and Sandra both, and not only for what you do as employees, but just for the spirit that you bring to your job and for the love of this community that shows every day that you show up. And with that, I'd like to give you both an opportunity just for any final words or any encouragement, any statement, any advice that you'd like to end with on tonight. Sunny, I'm going to actually go with you first.
I wasn't prepared for that, but I think probably I would share that getting opportunities to every patient, every person, no matter where and without boundaries is a highlight of my career, and I'm grateful to work with you to be able to accomplish this.
Well, they'll see lots of your face. I'm sure on November 4th, they'll see your face. They
I'll be
want to meet you. Thank you. And Sandra Casanova, you know how I love saying both your names at the same time.
I would just echo what Sunny said. I think that most of our passion is to be able to share these resources with people that can benefit from it and share more about what we do and the opportunities that we have with patients and participants that can use it to their advantage. And it's not only unilateral, it's not only the science getting information from the patient, but the patient also getting empowered by the information that they learn.
Empowerment, that's a positive and perfect way for us to end this hour. So on behalf of the Pause for the Truth team, Rogers Kane, Jocelyn Turner, and Cole Tyrone, thank you for spending this session with us, and we look forward to the opportunity to come before you again with more on clinical trials, cancer research, and empowerment. Thank you again, and have a good night.
Welcome to Pause for the Truth. We are grateful that you joined us today and hope you've gained valuable insights on our current topic. We look forward to having you with us next time as we explore trending issues in our community and discover ways to simplify life for you and your loved ones. Our dedicated panelists and staff are committed to sharing knowledge and serving our community. But now, we need your support. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and spread this valuable knowledge to others. Don't forget to invite your family and friends to tune in to our podcast every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. EST. Visit our website at www.pauseforthetruth.com and show your support by liking us on Facebook, following us on Twitter, and linking with us on LinkedIn. Feel free to email us with any questions, or concerns, or show topic recommendations at info@pauseforthetruth.com. I would also like to give thanks to our behind-the-scenes technology engineer, Tyrone Jackson, owner and operator of Call Tyrone. Go to www.calltyrone.net for a complete list of services. Thank you for being a part of Pause for the Truth. Together, we can make a positive impact on our community. Good night.